to today's webinar. So today we have got Ed Massey, Sustainability General Manager at New Zealand Wine, and really responsible for all the great work that the New Zealand wine industry is leading in terms of sustainability. Ed will talk more about it, but I can say the New Zealand wine industry really has a well-deserved reputation for being very advanced in their sustainability journey. So we're very, very glad to have Ed here to tell us more about that. And then Rosie, our senior specialist in the LCA team, with a lot of experience in carbon as well, has worked on the roadmap and will share a bit about that. And with that, I will hand it over to Ed.
Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate that. Look, today I'm going to talk very much around the why. Why did we get into developing our roadmap to net zero? How does it work with or enhance the New Zealand's wine industry's reputation for sustainability? What were the key drivers behind it? And then what have we learnt and where do we need to go are going to be the key areas of focus. Rosie will tell you more about how we did it. And so I think any of those technical or specific questions fire through to Rosie. Well, for the New Zealand wine industry, sustainability is absolutely fundamental as a differentiator for our wine in the world markets. It's a real key part of what drives our reputation as a product, and it's also essential, in defining our social license to operate as a primary sector industry in New Zealand. I would say that our sustainability journey is vital for continued growth. We haven't got to where we need to be, but we are on a journey of continuous improvement in order to get there. So why is sustainability so important? Well, first, consumers expect it. When you think about share of throat for alcohol as a product overall, people are drinking less alcohol than they used to. And the alcohol they are drinking really needs to align with their values. And so we think that our wine industry is really at that vanguard of change and that shift from value-added production in the primary sector to production that aligns with people's values. Similarly, key retailers and markets are putting restrictions and demands around your sustainability efforts for market access or preferential market access. And that really reflects the expectation of their customers around where we need to be and where we are going.
Do you have any slides to share?
I thought I was sharing them, Barbara. Hold on a sec. How's that?
Thank you.
Secondly, when you think about what's happening at home, governments are becoming increasingly demanding of the primary sector to really be robust and upfront about its environmental footprint. And so the environmental footprint of the wine industry has been well catalogued through our Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand program, which has been ongoing for 30 years this year. We need to keep this journey going to stay ahead of the regulatory curve that will be imposing costs on our members. And so our commitment to sustainability is a vital tool to achieve this goal. Thirdly, when you think about the cost of anything in the primary sector, and the wine industry is no different, hip pockets demand that we maximize the efficiency of all our inputs and how we use them. And when you think about what we are doing now within our fossil fuel use and the rest of our emissions, if we continue to do what we do now, it will be much more expensive to achieve what we do now in the future. So there has never been a cheaper time to change. And I think that's really been fundamental as an incentive for many of our members to accelerate their journey. Overall, for us, it's the right thing to do. It's a really key part of our industry. And our members' commitment to sustainability is really about this step-by-step journey into the future that will not only enhance our wine, but it'll leave our world better for it as well. Now, climate change is very much a microcosm, or the reasons why climate change is important is a microcosm of what I've already covered. But I'd have to say that since we introduced climate change into the Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand program in 2020, it has now become essentially the topic du jour. It is very much, when the phone rings, 3 out of 4 times, it will be something to do with climate change. I think that's key because we have a long way for our market to market, and there is a lot of conflation between, for example, food miles and a much broader concept of sustainability. And so we knew we needed to get right to the heart of the matter by getting a really good measure of our footprint. And so that was one of the fundamental reasons for getting into the roadmap. So what did we learn? We learned overall that our scope 3 emissions were by far the most significant component of our total footprint, which was 305,000 tonnes. Our scope 3 emissions primarily associated with the winery and the downstream supply chain accounted for over or around 250,000 tonnes, which is really significant. And that the vineyard accounted for much less. And I must admit, going into the project, I expected those numbers, I expected scope 3 to be significant, but not as significant as it turned out to be. And when you look at the biggest rocks of what is contributing to our emissions, sure, transport accounts for around 21% of our total emissions. So that's getting wine from New Zealand to market. But packaging is just so much more, the biggest rock, accounting for over 50% of total emissions. When you think about the vineyard side, diesel is one of the key contributors there. So if that's 17% overall of the vineyard emissions, over 50% of that is diesel, with a lot of others building up smaller rats and mice. What that means is, we've got a long way to travel. And however, I do believe it is feasible that we can get to our goal of being a net zero industry by 2050. The journey is not going to be linear. So we're not going to make a succession of 3% or 5% a year. We need technical innovation, and we need to work right across the supply chain to reduce these emissions comprehensively. We also need to work on increasing the amount of carbon removals. So that's essentially planting or other carbon removal projects that are there to reduce that emissions load. And we need to be careful that as we grow as an industry, we need to ensure that our efficiency is growing with that, is synonymous with that growth, so that we are not using more as we get bigger. We're in fact using less per unit effort in terms of emissions. That's really, really important. So what are the key areas that we need to make these changes in? Well, between now and 2030, a key focus needs to be improving energy efficiency. That means, how are you consuming your energy in your winery and on the vineyard, and how do you make that more efficient? We've partnered with the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, or ECA, who helped us to deliver this roadmap, and they have a wine industry decarbonisation guidelines on their website, and they have in the past had funding to support energy transition plans. It's been great to see a number of our members, all shapes and sizes, some of our biggest wineries and smaller wineries, jumping on board with ECA and getting stuck into figuring out how to maximize their energy efficiency. That's been critical, and I think will continue to be so over the next 5 years. Secondly, divesting from diesel is fundamental. So while it only accounts for 8 or 9% of our industry's total emissions, when you think about what our viticulture, it hasn't changed much in terms of how our tractors roll up and down rows in the last 50 years. Research that is ongoing at BRI around setting up new vineyard systems, as well as technological innovation to convert diesel fuel tractors into other fuel types, will continue to enable us to make reductions in this space. And I think, as I said before, New Zealand's participation in the ETS is going to drive diesel prices so high that we need to take up these innovations as fast as possible. One key advantage that industry has is that our energy grid largely is extremely efficient, and we need to invest in some of those sources of electricity that really minimize the burning of fossil fuels. So that transition to potentially wind, solar, or hydro is essential. We need to get away from using fossil fuels to power our wineries and fossil fuels to power vineyard operations. And I think that transition is underway, and I think it will accelerate in the next 5 years. Perhaps the most important thing we need to do, however, is to really invest in partnerships and engage across our entire supply chain to look at those biggest rocks of transport and of packaging. At the moment, New Zealand, or wine that is bottled in New Zealand from New Zealand made glass, is about the best story any industry can tell in terms of its carbon efficiency. For example, wine bottles produced in New Zealand come from around 70% of recycled cullet out of the Vizzy facility, and we have excellent means to use that to our advantage. Increasing number of wineries are lightweighting their glass. However, in the future, we need to investigate either low carbon glass or alternative packaging, or even the move to offshore bottling. All of these are going to be elements of our transition to a net zero future. There's no silver bullet, and I think it's really naive to think that a single transition is going to get us there in one step. The last key pillar is that investment in carbon removals and removing and reducing emissions by increasing carbon sequestration. We're seeing that already, and I think we will see that accelerate in the future. So I now want to pass over to Rosie to get more detail on how we did it and the process behind that, which I really hope will guide others into making their own decisions on where they need to be in the future regarding getting to net zero. Happy to answer any questions through the webinar, and thanks to Barbara and the team for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Ed. We already have one question, but we'll keep them all to the end and have all questions at the end for our panel. Rosie, over to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Can you see my screen okay? Perfect. Yeah, great. So in terms of decarbonisation roadmaps and the case for them, then I think what Ed has summarised really succinctly as the importance of being able to cast a look into the future first. That is the primary purpose behind why we deliberate and develop them. So they offer more than just a set of results on how to reduce your carbon emissions. Their intention is to help guide you towards a better understanding of the climate-related challenges that you have, that you want to tackle, and to explore a range of different alternate solutions that will support and suit your stakeholders, no matter where they are in their own sustainability journeys. So 50% of you said you're still working on your Scope 3 inventory. That is not necessarily a barrier towards becoming involved and engaging with a decarbonisation roadmap overall. What it's intended to do is provide a guide for progress that can be adapted and updated over time, incorporating feedback, incorporating updates to data to ensure the wheels keep turning for that sustainable transition. So they're really here to enable action and thought now and planning for the future. And why is that important? Because sustainability is really already in the balance sheet. It's a reality in cash flows, balance sheets of businesses. It's a reality in the capital allocation portfolios of financial institutions and in the purchasing decisions of end consumers as well as for New Zealand Winegrowers. And according to the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report from last year, there are 3 climate risks that are actually top global challenges, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that already more than half of our global GDP is dependent on nature and related to the impacts climate change might have upon those. So what did we do to help design this roadmap? Well, as Ed mentions, we considered the entire wine value chain from grape cultivation to bottling, and we really started looking at reduction opportunities, first of all, by considering 3 different time horizons for each scope of emissions. So first one being short term, by 2030. This is largely focusing on those low-hanging fruits, operational efficiency, growth in data collection and quality. Medium term, more operational step changes and innovations that can be informed by anticipated changes in the markets, low carbon market developments, and ways that capital investment can be adapted and changed as well. And then longer term, looking out to 2050, we investigated more structural changes across the wine value chain informed by things such as packaging innovation, changes to carbon pricing, potential for supply chain volatility, changes in legislation, and the physical impacts of climate change and how all of those different components might impact the sector in the future. Now, when we looked at these, then we split those different decarbonisation levers into controllables and uncontrollables across those 3 time horizons. So the controllable reduction opportunities are those which New Zealand winegrowers could control and directly influence. So things such as opting to electrify, The uncontrollables are those that New Zealand wine growers could not control or directly influence, and that may also change over time. So these include things such as electricity grid mix decarbonisation, glass decarbonisation, freight decarbonisation. Those are sort of the unknowns. And we model both of these. So the controllables based on information that we gathered from the wine growers and the winemakers, and the uncontrollables are based on our own scientific research and industry knowledge. What we then did is we then had our list of reduction levers, so that across the 3 time horizons, controllable and uncontrollable, and we asked 3 key questions. And those questions were, when are these reduction opportunities likely to be readily available on the market? When are they likely to be financially viable to invest in? And how significant carbon impact are each of these going to have? Using these 3 questions, we then scored each of these opportunities based on their feasibility to adopt, which is based on their current technological readiness as of 2024, and the perceived market acceptance for those opportunities at the moment. We looked at their carbon abatement potential, so how much carbon could they really save compared to what we're doing today? And how financially viable is it today and in the future? So for example, fuel efficiency is rated quite low for carbon abatement potential because it has a lower ability to reduce emissions than switching to an alternative technology, e.g. electrifying and using renewable energy to do so, electricity to do so, or transitioning to green hydrogen. However, it scores really well for feasibility because that is something they can do today. That is something you can do today. Electrification, meanwhile, represents a big reduction in emissions intensity because the greenhouse gas emissions of electricity in New Zealand, are considerably lower per unit of energy when compared against diesel. But it does have a higher investment cost associated with it to adopt. And that's how we really thought about it. So when looking at the 5 reduction opportunities that Ed just walked us through, they sort of align to 5 key principles. And that is 1, measuring your emissions, just getting started no matter where you're at in your sustainability journey. And importantly, know that it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. Don't let perfect get in the way of getting things done. This is something that using a decarbonisation roadmap, you can continue and improve your accounting over time, knowing that it's not going to be perfect straight away. It is challenging to engage a supply chain. It's challenging to get everyone involved. And it is something that happens gradually, that this provides the flexibility for you to do and commit to. Second point then is to reduce energy demand or maximize your energy efficiency is better wording for this really. Prioritize your energy efficiency in the short term. Innovate your operations. So investing in capital goods and infrastructure to help you divest from fossil fuels. Think about what those barriers are, what those actions are. And if it needs to be, create separate work streams for this, and so on and so forth. And what we really ended up with then is this roadmap, which it's quite nitty gritty. I don't expect you to be able to read all the finite detail on here, but it really goes through what, again, Ed was describing. What we did is for each time horizon, 2030, 2040, and 2050, we said, okay, by 2030, we think you're going to achieve up to 5% industry emissions reduction, which doesn't sound like necessarily a lot, but included within that, there's an awful lot of work to get you started. Things such as completing your energy audits, engaging with ECA, setting out your long-term strategy, and just agreeing on what that is. Those are all very fundamental starting points and are intended to help you avoid overwhelm of committing to too much too soon. Okay, and then by 2040, we looked at, okay, we're going to go for 12% emissions reduction now, but with a 50% reduction in scope 1 emissions and net zero scope 2 emissions. What does that really mean? Divesting from fossil fuels, implementing your fossil fuel divestment plan that you've been working on up to 2030. Okay, and there are a number of potential actions associated with that. And then by 2050, based on the various actions that we've got set out in this plan, which is also all available in the document that we've published, we should by 2050 therefore be able to achieve up to 80% decarbonisation of scope 1, 100% decarbonisation of scope 2, and at least 35% reduction of scope 3 emissions by that point. And that's going to be done through divesting from fossil fuels, maximising energy efficiency, beginning to remove carbon, and helping to align packaging with net zero obligations and procurement strategies. And that's how we achieved it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosie, and thank you, Ed. That was really, it was a whirlwind tour through what was really quite a big project. So excellent work for bringing it to the point. And we already have a couple of questions. One is from Simon. Hi, Simon. Good to see you again. Simon wants to know, is most of the vineyard diesel used for tractors, or is it in frost protection or somewhere else?
Easy answer there. Yep, it's predominantly in tractor use. So going up and down the roads. I think we calculated somewhere around 108,000 kilometres of vineyard road in New Zealand, and there are a large number of passes in tractors each year. Is another contributor, but it's not as significant as it doesn't occur throughout the season, in essence.
Thank you. Megan would like to know, Ed, I believe the carbon footprint can be reduced greatly by reusing bottles. Have you investigated collect and wash refill options for local wine and communities? A small portion of total wine produced, but a possibility for local markets, perhaps?
I think that's a really has good potential in the local context. There are some markets or local markets around New Zealand where there are really strong wine communities that would support refillables. We've engaged with some of the refillable pioneers in this space over the last 2 or 3 years, and are certainly looking to educate our members on those opportunities. Large scale, it is a bit more challenging as we export not 90% of our wine. But for those that are members that have the local market as a key one, I think it is certainly an opportunity that I suggest that they explore.
No, thank you. I believe one key aspect would be for a number of local wineries to have identical bottles. I think there is quite a difference in what bottles there are. And we have looked at some other bottle refilling, and there is a minimum number of refills that is required for it to actually be a benefit. So
certainly, Barbara, it takes scale, and scale doesn't come without education. Scale doesn't come without market acceptance, and I think at this stage it's very niche, but it's an opportunity to explore.
Yeah, we've got a couple more questions. Hi Edwin, you said your current focus is on climate change. In general, however, the definition of sustainability is much broader and consumers demand them, e.g. water use, biodiversity, etc. What are your thoughts, or more importantly, plans for working on a broader sustainability topic?
Good, great question, Kaya. Look, the New Zealand Winegrowers Environment Strategy has 6 key focus areas. You've named some of them. It's water, waste, people, climate change, plant protection, and soil. That's what sustainability means to us. In 2020, our board agreed key goals. Some are quantitative, like being net zero by 2050. Some are qualitative, like being a world leader in efficient water use and the protection of water quality. But as you'll probably already know, you can't go down to the shop and buy sustainability. You have to codify it. What does it mean for you? And once you've figured out what it means for you, you've got to set goals that are achievable and realistic, but also you've got to ensure progress across that broader front. And that's why I said, when you think of sustainability, think of it as a journey of continuous improvement where a goal is a goal, but it's not an endpoint. And for us, we've got that quite broad suite, and we use Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, Sustainable Industry Assurance Program to certify our members across those 6 different areas.
Thank you. We'll take one more from Tessa. Seen you a long time ago. Good to have you here. What are the exciting supplier partnerships that we can expect to see from New Zealand Winegrowers on this roadmap? And is any trans-Tasman collaboration on the cards?
Hi Tessa, good to hear from you. Look, I think for me, we've seen really good progress in the last 3 years since we first released our sustainability report in 2022 to the one we've recently released this year, particularly around those energy efficiencies. And we've seen a 10% increase in the number of wineries implementing specific energy efficiency activities over that 3-year period. And I think that work that partnership with ICA has been really important for that. I think similarly, we've seen an 8% increase since 2022 in wineries who have switched to lightweight glass as one of their packaging methods. And I think this will continue because it simply has to regarding market access. And I think in the transport space, just this year, we've seen a really exciting initiative down here with the establishment of the Marlborough Inland Port, which essentially is maximising the efficiency for transporting bottles to and from Nelson, empty and full, in the opposite direction, to minimise the amount of kilometres travelled by trucks. And I think, as the roadmap highlighted, transport accounts for around 21% of our total emissions, and it's moves like that. So a combination between a bottling facility like Wineworks in Marlborough, the transport companies, that are really doing some heavy lifting to reduce our emissions. And it is these things or partnerships across that supply chain, which is going to continue to drive progress. And I'm really excited and optimistic about what we can achieve.
Thank you so much. We are already over time, and we do have quite a few other questions. So what we will do is we will answer all of them. Once we have the replay up, we will post all the questions, the answers. We'll get them all back to you as well. So we will answer all your questions, but we'll have to wrap it up now. What we would like to do is to say again a very big thank you to our speakers. It's been great to have your engaging conversations, encouraging a lot of others to follow your lead. So congrats again to New Zealand Wine. If you're interested in how to get started with Scope 3, our next webinar might be useful for you. That's all about spend-based emission factors, which are a really good starting point for Scope 3. And with that, thanks again so much, Ed and Rosie, for sharing all you have done, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
We have many more webinar replays on a whole host of sustainability topics. You can check them out on our website and our YouTube channel.